Hello, everyone, and welcome back to First Pages. This week we're going to be reading Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes by Jonathan Auxier. Let me read you the blurb. Peter Nimble and His Fantastic Eyes is the utterly beguiling tale of a 10-year-old blind orphan who has been schooled in a life of thievery. One fateful afternoon, he steals a box from a mysterious traveling haberdasher, a box that contains 3 pairs of magical eyes. When he tries the first pair, he is instantly transported to a hidden island where he is presented with a special quest to travel to the dangerous vanished kingdom and rescue people in need. Along with his loyal sidekick, a knight who has been turned into an unfortunate combination of horse and cat, and the magic eyes, Peter Nimble embarks on an unforgettable, swashbuckling adventure to discover his true destiny. And so, I'm going to read you the first pages. Part 1. Gold. Now, for those of you who know anything about blind children, you are aware that they make the very best thieves. As you can well imagine, blind children have incredible senses of smell, and they can tell what lies behind a locked door, be it fine cloth, gold, or peanut brittle, at 50 paces. Moreover, their fingers are small enough to slip right through keyholes, and their ears keen enough to detect the faintest clicks and clacks of every moving part inside even the most complicated lock. Of course, the age of great thievery has long since passed. Today there are few child thieves left, blind or otherwise. At one time, however, the world was simply thick with them. This is the story of the greatest thief who ever lived. His name, as you've probably guessed, is Peter Nimble. As with most infants, Peter came into this world with no name at all. One morning, a group of drunken but good-hearted sailors spotted him bobbing in a basket alongside their ship. Perched on the boy's head was a large raven, which had, presumably, pecked out his eyes. Disgusting! The sailors killed this bird, and delivered the child to the authorities of a nearby port town. Though the magistrates had no use for a blind infant, a local by-law required them to at least give the boy a name. By a silent show of hands they christened him Peter Nimble, after a misremembered nursery rhyme. With this name, and nothing else, he was sent off to make his way in the world. For the first while he was nursed on the milk of a wounded mother cat, whom he met after crawling beneath the local alehouse. The cat permitted baby Peter to live with her in exchange for his picking the lice and ticks from her fur, until one tragic day some months later, when the alehouse manager discovered them huddled beneath his porch. Furious at finding vermin in his establishment, the man shoved the whole family into a bag and tossed them into the bay. Using his skillful fingers to untie the knot on the bag marked the beginning of Peter's career. Being furless and naturally buoyant, he managed to make it back to shore without too much trouble. The cats, on the other hand, did not fare so well. Until this point, you have been witness to Peter's rather typical infancy, probably not unlike your own. But it was only a matter of time before he distinguished himself from the teeming masses. The first hints of this appeared in Peter's uncanny gift for survival. Since he had no parents to purchase clothes and food for him, he found it necessary to take matters into his own hands. There is an old saying about how easy it is to take candy from a baby. This saying is utterly false. Anyone who has tried to take anything from a baby knows well what sort of crying, kicking, and general commotion will ensue. It is very easy, however, for babies to take things from us. Despite being blind, young Peter had no trouble sniffing out fruit stands and vegetable carts to steal from. He would toddle wherever his nose led him, and innocently cut his teeth on whatever food he wanted. He soon began to pinch other necessities, such as clothes, bedding, and a bandage for his eyes. He tried stealing shoes, but found that he preferred going barefoot. By his 3rd birthday, he was an expert in petty theft, a known menace to the vendors. More than once he had been caught in the act, only to slip away before the constable could be alerted. One problem with the life of crime is that it lowers your chances of social advancement. Law-abiding citizens take one look at children like Peter and turn the other way, never to offer sweets, toys, or hope of adoption. In providing for himself, our boy had all but guaranteed that he would grow up parentless and alone. All that changed, however, when he met an enterprising fellow named Mr. Seamus. Mr. Seamus was a tall, wiry man, with meaty hands and an enormous head. Because of his clumsy touch, he had been unable to live out of his dream of becoming a cat burglar. Instead, Mr. Seamus had taken a career as a beggar-monger. A beggar-monger, as you might imagine, is someone who deals in beggars. The man had built up a business of adopting orphans, maiming them good and proper, and then sending them out into the street to beg for coins. Any child who dared to come home empty-handed was throttled and sold to the workhouse. All told, Mr. Seamus had probably gone through about 30 orphans in his career. Peter was 5 years old when the beggar-monger first spied him beside a fruit stand in the market. "Hello, boy!" Mr. Seamus said upon his approach. "What's your name?" "They call me Blind Pete, sir," the small boy said, still too young to know not to talk to strangers. Mr. Seamus leaned closer for a better look at him. It was his experience that blind children made especially successful beggars. "And where are your parents?" he asked. "I don't have parents," the boy answered. By now Peter's hunger was getting the best of him, so he quickly reached a hand behind his back and stole an apple from the fruit cart. Mr. Seamus glimpsed this action out of the corner of one eye, and nearly took his breath away. The boy had stolen the apple, not from the top of the stack, but from somewhere deep in the middle, leaving the outside completely untouched. For an ordinary person such a feat would be impossible, but for this filthy child it was second nature. Mr. Seamus knew at once that he was standing before a very gifted thief. The man leaned closer, eyeing the boy's delicate fingers. "Well, Pete," he said in his sweetest voice, "my name is Mr. Seamus, and I'm ruddy glad we met. You see, I'm a great important businessman, but I've got no son to share my riches with." Mr. Seamus took the apple from Peter's small hands, biting into it as he spoke. "How would you like," he bid again, "to become my business partner? You could live with me in my mansion, eat my food, and play with my dog, Killer." "What kind of dog is it?" Peter asked, hoping very much it was big enough for him to ride. "It's a Siamese," Mr. Seamus said, after thinking a moment. "Are Siamese big?" "The biggest. I suppose he could swallow you whole if he wanted." Mr. Seamus tossed an apple core into his mouth, and swallowed it whole. "Now, what do you say, boy?" There was no mansion. There were no riches, servants, or feasts. Killer was real enough, but he was missing a leg, and quite old. Like most things, he hated children. Instead of giving Peter rides, he spent most of his time limping, growling, and lapping the drip off of his disgusting snout. Mr. Seamus gave up beggar-mongering and never looked back. He sold off his other orphans and devoted himself entirely to Peter's education and thievery. For the first year, he locked all the boys' meals inside an old sea chest. If Peter wanted to eat, he had to pick the lock with his bare fingers. This not only taught him valuable burgling skills, but also saved Mr. Seamus a great deal in expenses. The boy went hungry for over 2 weeks before getting a first meal in his new home. When he finally did manage to unlock the chest, by stumbling across the McNeary twist maneuver, the scraps were long spoiled. But eventually he grew more adept at picking locks, until at last he had gone through every one in his master's collection. Mr. Seamus also trained Peter in the fine art of sneakery, how to creep over floorboards, rooftops, and even gravel, so as not to make a single sound. The boy proved a fast learner, and soon mastered the gamut of thieving crafts, from window cutting to advanced rope work. By the age of 10, Peter Nimble had become the greatest thief the town has ever seen. But, of course, no one actually saw him. They only saw the open safes and empty jewelry boxes that he left behind. Every night, Mr. Seamus sent Peter into the town to steal, and every sunrise, Peter returned to Mr. Seamus with a burgle sack full of loot. "Worm!" which is what the man had taken to calling him. "You done ruddy well. Now get out of my sight!" With that he would lock the boy inside the cellar, leaving Killer to stand guard. Peter didn't actually mind the cellar all that much. Being blind, he didn't care about the lack of light, and sitting down there was far better than looting honest people's houses. Whatever wrongs he may have committed, and stealing things is wrong, Peter was still a good child who wanted nothing to do with burglaring. Every morning, as he curled up to sleep on the damp cellar floor, he would pretend that he could sneak past Killer, break into Mr. Seamus's great treasure room, and return all of the stolen goods to their rightful owners. He would imagine thankful townsfolk rescuing him from cruel Mr. Seamus and inviting him to live forever in a big warm house full of wood and singing, and other joyous children. In short, he would dream of being happy. But this was only a dream, and every sunset he would wake once again to the shouts of Mr. Seamus, and be kicked back outside for another evening of pilfering the possessions of honest citizens. And so it went for Peter Nimble. He was miserable, mistreated, and forced to commit misdemeanors, day after day, season after season, year after year, until one very special, very rainy afternoon, when he met a stranger who would change his life forever. Chapter 2. The Haberdasher's Mystery Box. On top of his nightly thievery, Peter also had household chores. Every second Tuesday he was sent out by Mr. Seamus to steal food from the market. This particular second Tuesday was no exception. "Get up, Worm!" Mr. Seamus hollered as he clumped down the cellar stairs shortly after dawn. "It's grocery day. I don't feed you just to loll around here all morning." Peter had spent the night burgling, and just had gotten to bed an hour before. "You don't feed me, anyway," he muttered in what can only be called an act of sleepy stupidity. The next moment he felt a big, meaty fist grab hold of his hair and yank him to his feet. "Don't forget who you're talking to, Worm," Mr. Seamus said, dragging Peter's scrawny frame upstairs and through the main house. "Just for that, it's a double shift. You'll bring me food and money and a chew toy for Killer." The dog licked his chops appreciatively as they passed. "Yes, sir. Forgive me," Peter said with genuine remorse. He knew better than to talk back, but words, as you know, sometimes have a way of slipping out. "Save your sorries for the hangman." Mr. Seamus shoved the boy into the street and threw his burgle sack after him. "That had better be full when I see you again, or else," he said, slamming the door. Peter picked himself up and slung his bag over one shoulder. Hearing fat raindrops percolating in the clouds high above, he sighed. Rain presents a unique problem for those in Peter's line of work. You see, when it rains, rich people seldom come out for fear of melting. If they do venture out of doors, they are usually accompanied by umbrella-bearing servants who keep a close watch for pickpockets. There is nothing the town loves to do more than hang pickpockets, and any criminal hoping to steal a wallet under such circumstances is putting himself at great risk. It was for this reason that Peter hardly managed to nick a single thing over the course of this unpleasant rainy afternoon. He was rounding a corner with his shirt full of broccoli and kippers, thinking about how much trouble he would be in if he didn't bring any money back for Mr. Seamus, when he happened upon the crowd of people gathered by the dock. This was a great stroke of luck. As a rule, pickpockets thrive on tightly packed crowds. Even better, all of the umbrella-bearing servants were just as distracted as their masters. The boy ditched his groceries and set to work at once. He carefully picked his way through the crush, lifting billfolds from eager onlookers and trying to figure out what was causing such a commotion. "Do you tire of looking like a friar?" a voice boomed from somewhere beyond the crowd. "Is your scalp bare as an Alp? Not any more. This fine turban, made of bear skin from the dark South Seas, will restore your luscious locks overnight." The voice belonged to a man standing somewhere to Peter's left. "Hats for every head. Whatever your need, look no further." His voice was confident and smooth, his words like a spell holding the crowd captive. It might be wise to pause a moment and explain the many details of this scene that were lost to Peter Nimble. He was unable to see the leaning tower of hats perched atop the man's head. He was also unable to see the speaker's sharp jaw, crooked red nose, and long, owlish eyebrows. The only thing Peter knew was that this man had provided a perfect opportunity for a young pickpocket to practice his art on a hapless crowd. Okay, that's going to be it for today. I'm going to let this book be back in the library for you guys to pick it up if you want to read it. This sounds like a really interesting book, so I would definitely recommend you give it a try. Thank you for listening and have a good week.